you're just like mind blown almost. As a marketer, I can actually build something now. That was like a huge thing for me because I just don't want to spend my time doing like these very like mundane tasks. And now you're going to build the ecosystem and all these agents to do that thing for you. That's going to be the future of marketing. Marketers can become better at software development than like an engineer can be at marketing.
I'm here with Austin Lau, the first growth marketer at Anthropic. Today, we're going to talk about how he uses AI to do his job, how he runs performance marketing with AI, and his tips for when to use Claude Cowork versus Claude Code. My name is Nick Lafferty. Let's get into it. I want to talk about what we were talking about before we started recording is you joined Anthropic and it was kind of a rush to get you in because there was a new model coming out. Can you kind of talk about the early days when you joined and what model you were kind of supporting from a marketing perspective in the beginning?
The first models I actually helped launch was the Claude 3 model family. Back then, like marketing team was like very different, right? Like the company was maybe around 400 people total, I think, in the marketing function. I believe I was like the fifth marketer to join. Fifth marketer, I was like the first person doing anything like growth related. So there was like a lot of hats you had to wear. It was a really big learning experience. It was also, I mean, quite frankly, it was very stressful at times. Because like one of the things is like, despite the company already being at like 400 something people, there was like really no like foundation for a lot of these like kind of like traditional, like both marketing, but particularly growth marketing efforts. There was effectively like nothing. Like I came in, like there were no like processes, like there weren't any like tools. Early days, it was really about like building the foundations, like figuring out like, okay, like what tools do we actually need to procure? Then once you get those tools, like, okay, now we got to figure out like, how do we set this up? How do we actually like get the first emails out there? Like, how do we build the first email templates? Like, how do we actually set up a pixel here? Like, is there a process for like getting like, you know, cookies reviewed? If not, like, do we need a process? So there's a lot of sort of like circus wrangling back then of like just pulling in like all the right folks into the right room and then having these conversations about like, okay, we need to go out and start actually doing something. Like, how do we actually get started?
Do you remember the first thing you built with Claude, either to like run an internal process or do something externally too?
I tried building a couple things just with like the Claude web chat. Like I remember trying to build a bunch of Python scripts to help with some of my work. Like I was managing like some Google Ads campaigns like early on. And then I was like, okay, like Claude's kind of good-ish at like some of this coding stuff. And with like Google Ads, like scripting has always been like a really core part of like managing Google campaigns for like some of the more advanced users. But like most of the time you would just find these scripts kind of floating out there on the internet and then you would like, you know, copy it in and then like run it and be like, great, like it worked. But if you wanted to do anything like more custom, you needed to know coding to some degree. And I obviously didn't come from a very non-technical background. And I was like, okay, there's like these some certain pain points that I had. Like it'd be great if I could like create a script to like help with some of this stuff. And I'm like, you know, I don't know how to go about this. And I'm like, Claude, can you like help me with like some of these scripts, like very like rudimentary? And like Claude would come up with like, you know, here's like, you know, 200 lines of like code. You would paste it in, try to run it. Google Ads will throw back like a bunch of errors. You go back to Claude. There's a lot of like back and forth. And like that was probably one of the first true instances of me actually like building something, quote unquote. And it was like really fun back then, even though like it wasn't like great, but like, you know, after a while it would actually work. And then you're just like mind blown almost because you're like, wow, like, you know, as a marketer, I can actually build something now. And that was like a really like enlightening moment where from then on, I was like pretty hooked.
How do you feel that Claude and other AI tools are enabling marketers now? Because how I feel is I have superpowers. Like the things I wanted to do, like make a Google Ads script, I could never do that before. Now I ask Claude, I paste it in, it just one-shots it at this point, and it just works. And so how do you feel marketers now, like with AI, like what are they more enabled to do now that maybe like we couldn't do before?
Marketers can definitely move like way faster now. And one of my hot takes when it comes to like AI and like marketing is because like Claude, ChatGPT, all these like large language models are so good at coding, it's really like democratized access to like software development. And my take is that like marketers can become better at software development than like an engineer can be at like marketing. So it's been like a very interesting sort of like paradigm shift, seeing like a bunch of like marketers, or particularly just anyone who's non-technical, start to go out and think about like, how do I actually build a lot of these like point solutions to address these pain points that like I have been experiencing for years, but there just isn't like a solution out there for me, or like I don't have a bunch of engineers to like help me build these things. Like, how can I go out and like do this myself? And for marketing in particular, I think this is going to cause like a pretty like seismic shift in the way like marketers actually like work. So I think marketing is going to go from kind of the current state today to like becoming more of like a product manager type role, where instead of like going out and sort of like executing and just like, going down this very linear path of like, I have a campaign and then like I need to, whatever, let's say a performance marketer. I wake up today, I'm going to hop into my campaigns. I'm going to maybe diagnose any issues that might be going on. And then based off of like the knowledge that I've accumulated over the years, I'm then going to pull on like these levers, whatever it may be, adjust the budget, rotate a new creative, yada, yada. And then, maybe a couple days later, I'll come back and I'll see what was my change? Like, how did it perform? Maybe like, 1 day later, 7 days later, 14 days later, et cetera. We're going to move from that sort of like very linear path to being like product managers who actually build the systems to actually like orchestrate this whole loop. So imagine creating like a closed loop system where instead of me, a marketer, managing a bunch of campaigns, it's me, a marketer, managing a bunch of agents, and like really just being like the mastermind, like kind of the puppet master, and like managing all these different agents that are orchestrating the work for me. And because you're a marketer who spent like so many years being like intimately familiar with like the challenges, the pain points, what makes a campaign tick versus what doesn't. You understand like the nuances of like these like, maybe ad platforms or like messaging, whatever it may be. You're in a really, really good position to then actually build like the agent, to build the solutions to actually help automate a ton of this work. Probably a lot more familiar than maybe an engineer who spent their entire life like developing software, because you've been on the other side, you've been the actual operator for all these like marketing functions, and now you have the ability to actually build the solutions.
I completely agree with you. We have this concept called the marketing engineer, which we came out with at Zero Click San Francisco in September, and the ethos of that is exactly what you described, of a marketer who becomes an engineer, not an engineer who becomes a marketer, because you need taste, experience, judgment, wisdom of like, it's almost knowing what not to do.
Yeah.
And that's really, really helpful. Like, what do you think about the concept of a marketing engineer in general?
I think marketing engineers are for sure going to catch on like a lot more. You start to see like some companies out there, especially the ones that are like sort of like the frontier, who are thinking of like hiring for these roles. So like some of the ones you might commonly see, like there's like an applied AI role for like, marketing, but then we read the job description, they're like, we're looking for like a marketer here. Like, but this role is like you're part marketer, part like engineer, and like you're gonna be in like this kind of applied AI function where like your customer, quote unquote, is like our internal marketing team. And so I've seen this at companies like Stripe. I think like Ramp and Replit are the good examples where they've come out with like almost like these product focused roles, but they're hiring marketers. And then the job description basically says like, hey, you're a marketer, you've done this your whole life. But instead of like coming in, like managing campaigns, like you're going to come in, you're going to build agents to manage the whole thing end to end. And you're going to oversee all the orchestration. And like, that's going to be your job. And we want somebody who has years of experience doing the thing. And now you're going to build the basically the ecosystem and all these agents to do that thing for you. And I think that's going to be, again, really going to be the future of marketing.
What is maybe something you've learned being on the inside at Anthropic of a best practice for going and like making agents or building loops or systems that way?
A couple of things that I sort of learned as I've like been toying around and building things, when I was at Anthropic, like one is I used to try to one-shot everything. I think this is like, pretty common knowledge now. It's like, hey, we're trying to build something pretty like complex. Like the models are really good and oftentimes they can one-shot stuff, but like break it down to like sort of like composable pieces, because what I found to be the most helpful is, especially if I'm trying to do something very complex, if I can like break it down to like smaller like chunks, it's also easier for me to evaluate it, right? So it's like I'm running like soft versions of evals, where it's like very much like a soft version where like I'll like break down like a very complex task into like maybe like 5 different steps. I'll have it do like build step 1, I'll have it run step 1, and then I'll sort of like evaluate it and just like take a look and be like, okay, this is kind of past like the sniff test, like this look good. Like if it's writing some copy, like how do I feel about that. And then like you progressively build more and more on top of it. The other part is you need to continuously actually evaluate like how your sort of agent works or how your workflow works like over time, because even though models progressively get better, it can change the behavior of like how something works. So for example, like Anthropic recently released like, Opus 5, and like a lot of people say it's like really great, but other people actually say like, oh, like the writing style and like the way like Opus talks is like actually like a little bit worse than like some of the other models. Like, I prefer like Opus 4.8 better. And like those are like some of the subtle nuances where even though like on paper, if you take a look at the benchmarks and you're like, oh, all the numbers are going up. But then some of these more like subtle nuances of like, okay, well, like this model doesn't like sound as good as like the other models when it comes to things like writing, which is something that like marketers care about a lot. You want to make sure you're like consistently just evaluating instead of just like dropping in like a new model string and just calling it a day.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to running evals for marketing work, marketing itself is very subjective. Like I could think a marketing campaign is great. You could think it's terrible or off base. Have you thought about how to build kind of like evals for marketing to where you can kind of objectively judge if this is good or not?
Good question. Marketing is one of those like functions where like everyone has always been like AI is going to eat marketing. Like marketers, you guys are cooked. Like AI is going to replace all your jobs. Interesting enough, like when I go out and talk to like, CMOs or like founders, like they can be at like startups or like these like huge Fortune 500 companies. Like these CMOs are like, we're trying to figure out like how to use like AI more within our marketing org, but we actually don't know like exactly how to use AI or even really adopt AI. And like part of the reason is because like marketing is very subjective, right? Like what I might think is like good, you might think is like horrible. Like when we did our Super Bowl ad, like a lot of people were like, this is hilarious. And you have other people who are like, this is like tone deaf, or like, why are you guys trying to attack these other companies? And like, it's always going to be like that. And then the other part of marketing, which makes it a little bit inherently harder versus like I think other functions, is that marketing is very public. So that means you succeed in public, you also fail in public. So when it comes to like incorporating like AI into a lot of these workflows, it can become a little bit tricky sometimes. So that's why I think a lot of companies are a little bit hesitant to like truly really embed AI in a lot of their workflows. So like when I think about the concept of like marketing evals, sort of circling back to your question, I think it's going to be very challenging because like one is there's always going to be this idea of like, hey, this is very subjective. It's like, how do you actually know if, let's say, a paragraph of copy is better than the last paragraph of copy?
Like
and
what
like
is better in that case,
and like what is better? Like we all have different definitions of better. And even if we agreed on like, hey, we think this is better, can you then quantify how much better it is? So there aren't really like benchmarks out there just yet to like really quantify and like evaluate like a marketing workflow. There's maybe some like more like objective things we can look at, like depending on what the workflow is. Like if something you're trying to do, like if you're trying to build like some sort of automation, you're thinking about like time savings. And it's like, yeah, that's something very objective we can measure. Like how quick is it for us to, I don't know, like build a new campaign and have like Claude do the whole thing. Like you can objectively say like, was the campaign built correctly? Yes. And then the next question is like, well, how fast was it built? And if it's faster and it was done correctly, then it's like, great, this is objectively better. Mm-hmm. When all the other nuances when it comes to marketing, it's going to be very, very hard.
Yeah, maybe almost you could look at like tokens too, of how many tokens the cost was to make this, and hopefully that you drive that down over time, and that's kind of a way to objectify it a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, funny thing, which is like, obviously when you work at a frontier lab, you get the luxury of unlimited tokens. So like the sort of like concept of like token management has been like honestly a little bit foreign to me because we've never had to worry about it, because like internally, like you're like, hey, you have like carte blanche, like, hey, Austin, you want to go blow like 1 billion tokens on Claude Code, like just building something, and even if it doesn't work, it's like, great, go ahead and do that. And this is true for any employee. It's like you're very empowered to go out and build because we had that luxury, and I definitely recognize like this is a very sort of privileged stance. So yeah, to your point, like being able to optimize like token consumption is also going to be very, very important, because like the cost savings aspect is like huge, especially as like token consumption is only ever going up across all these different companies.
Yeah. Being on the inside, what do you think is normal to you in your use of Claude Code or Cowork or whatever that people outside are maybe a couple of months behind? Like, is there a feature or a setting or like / loop that you find you're using a lot that other people maybe aren't?
I think like loop engineering has been like a really big one. I think to some degree, a lot of developers these days are already very much like, loop pilled. That's kind of like the hot topic on Twitter, like 2 weeks ago. I would say for non-technical people who are building, I think most people, the way they would approach it is like, maybe I'll boot up Claude Code or maybe Codex. I'll go in and then I'll just like prompt, get a response, the model will like build something and then like I'll maybe test it out and then I'll go back and prompt some more. And then it's like this back and forth, it's a very traditional way of like engaging with an LLM, right? But I think what some of the non-technical builders haven't fully adopted yet are going to be things like loops actually. And also like, even like /goal, where like you give the model like, here's like an objective, like end state of what I want to build. And I want you to then go out and basically build that, try to achieve this goal. And at the same time, you tackle like a loop and say like, hey, like here's like some of the objective things that I want you to then go back and like check in on to make sure we're on track to ensure that we hit this goal. And then you just let the model kind of run for a bit and see what it comes back with. And most of the time, like with like, some good prompting, like you can actually do a lot of the work up front and say like, I want to build this, like here's like the criteria, here's like the exit criteria, like here are the features I want you to build, as opposed to doing it piecemeal, then saying like, okay, you built this, okay, now do that. Okay, I'll review this. Okay, now do that. The models are really good these days where it can get you to a pretty solid state of, a pretty good product just by using a combination of goal and loops.
Nice. Are there any skills that you've built or used that are now kind of core? Like if you took them away, you would be much worse off?
Funny enough, like I probably use less skills than I think many marketers might.
Okay.
So one of my other sort of hot takes I talked about is like, I think there's like this concept of like, you got to build as many skills as possible. Like you'll see like a lot of these GitHub repos, particularly for marketing, where it's like, you got to download like these like 50 skills. It's going to replace your marketing org. Like you're going to save, millions of dollars by using these skills. And I take a look at some of these repos and I open the skills and I'm like reading through some of them. And I'm like, some of these skills don't actually provide the model with more context at runtime that the model already doesn't know. Because the benefit of skills, right? One is that there's like the progressive disclosure portion where it's like you can provide, a description and then, at runtime, like the model can then say like, oh, like, Austin's asking about a certain thing. Let me take a look at my context and see if there's like an applicable skill that I can then pull up and then read without clogging the context window. So progressive disclosure is one benefit of skill. The other benefit is, can you provide the model with more instruction, details, context instructions, whatever, at runtime that the model innately does not have? And as the models get like smarter and smarter and get like more parameters and, have more knowledge around like maybe the different marketing functions, it's going to know a lot of things that probably don't require skills to then give it additional context on. So I think skills in general can actually be simplified a lot because the models are very smart.
Okay.
The other aspect of skills, like at least for me personally, is I find that I only really want to create a skill when it's something that is like truly highly repeatable, so that there's like a lot of volume. So like the frequency is high enough for me to then say like, I want to encode this into a skill because I'm going to use this on a very, very consistent basis. Then that's the time where I'm like, okay, let me actually like sit down and turn this to a skill. But for some of like the smaller things, like I generally like actually don't really use skills that much.
What do you think people should, what context should people be giving the model instead of a skill that's like, oh, you're an expert SEO, write 10 blog posts?
Yeah. Like the stuff like before where it's like, hey, you're an expert, marketer, yada, yada. Like you need to come up with like, a strategy for, my keyword research. Claude, ChatGPT, they know a lot about SEO already. You don't need to tell it like, hey, you are an expert at SEO. Instead, like what skills are very valuable for, again, when you think about what I just mentioned around like, what is the context you can provide the model that it does not have a runtime? The model knows nothing about like your company, your marketing objectives, what like your marketing program looks like what's your portfolio. Those are very important pieces of context that I think do make sense to provide maybe as a skill. So for example, like a lot of companies might have like a brand tone sort of skill when they're like trying to work through maybe like some copy for email or for like a blog post. That's very valuable because a model probably has no idea like what your company's actual brand guidelines are. It's probably going to be pretty useful to actually have that as a skill.
Nice. Yeah, we have all of those for Profound too, of brand guidelines, tone of voice, product lines. Mm-hmm. I found this helpful because we ship very quickly, as Anthropic and other companies do too, that sometimes the models can't keep up with what our new products are, what they do, the features. And then so we keep a skill library.
That's like huge. At some point, like we even came up with a skill to basically teach Claude about like our like API features and pricing and like all that stuff, because like if you take a look at like the cutoff date for the training data, it's like, it's months behind, maybe like a year behind, right? And oftentimes like during that sort of like that time in between when the cutoff date was versus like now, present reality, a lot has changed, a lot has happened. There's probably going to be a bunch more products that have been launched, a bunch of new features. And what would oftentimes happen is you'd ask Claude like, hey, I need you to, help me implement something with like, let's say like the Claude SDK. And then like Claude will respond with something that's completely outdated. So then we had to basically build a skill to then tell Claude like, hey, if we're talking about like, the API or something related to like documentation with the API, like, here's the skill, reference the skill, and then maybe do like a web fetch on like our latest API docs, just to make sure you have like the most up-to-date like information. Or even if you were to say like, oh, I want you to add in this new model string for this new model, and Claude would be like, oh, that model isn't released yet, Nice. Stuff like that happens all the time.
When you use Claude, you more of a desktop app or a terminal kind of Claude user?
I've always been more of like a terminal user. Okay. And that's largely just because like when I first started using Claude Code, it was only available in the terminal. Mm-hmm. And then later on, when it was added to the desktop app, it was like, I was also a desktop app user just for Cowork and for regular chats. Mm-hmm. But I never quite fully switched over to using Claude Code on the desktop app. I still sort of default to terminal. It was just force of habit, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people ask me when to use Cowork versus Claude Code, which I'm sure is a question you get a lot. Do you have a simple kind of like heuristic?
Yes. I actually have a blog post that I wrote about this. So you go to claude.com/blog, and I think the title is How to Get Started with Cowork. So I wrote up a whole guide around like when to reach for what and like why. Here's the sort of like simple like mind map that I built, which is like, if your ultimate like outcome that you want is just going to be like a conversation, just reach for chat. At the end of this, like I don't need to walk away with anything other than like just having a conversation with Claude. Then it's like, just reach for chat. If at the end of a conversation, you actually want some sort of like deliverable, particularly if it's like knowledge work shaped, like let's say it's like a file or it's like a sheet or like a deck or something, like Cowork is very useful for that. And like the beauty of Cowork is it's powered by the same harness as Claude Code. So underneath the hood, Cowork is Claude Code. Underneath the hood for ChatGPT Work is Codex. Mm-hmm. They're all powered by the same harness. It's almost like a different like front-end UI for people who maybe are less technical. They don't need to see, Claude or Codex write like a bunch of like code. They want to leverage that sort of like agentic harness, that like being able to take multi-turns without seeing all of that actually happen. So like those are what those products are used for. And the other good thing about Cowork is if you have like a lot of like different inputs, let's say it's like, oh, I'm uploading like, a couple different spreadsheets and like a PDF, and I also have like maybe some MCPs that I'm connected in here. And at the very end, I'm looking for like a deliverable. That's what Cowork is really, really good for. My general sort of rule of thumb for like non-technical folks is, unless you're like actually doing like true coding, like you're like, pushing code into a repo or you're like building an app, you probably don't need to reach for tools like Claude Code. Mm-hmm. You can just probably stay within like the chat and like Cowork sphere, because your work is generally just only going to be knowledge work shaped. Yeah. Like you'll know if you need to use like a Claude Code or a Codex. Most of the confusion comes around, when do I reach for chat versus like a Cowork or a ChatGPT work? And again, like I just think about like, what is the end state? What is the deliverable I want in the end? If it's just a conversation, I just want to riff on something, brainstorming, chat will do perfectly fine. You don't need to reach for Cowork.
Nice. I think that's a really good framework to use of what is the end output you want. Is these tools and systems develop, iterate so quickly, how do you keep up with what new tools or systems or slash commands to use? I guess like even like when you were internal and then kind of like externally too.
I obviously follow like, social accounts very closely to see like what are folks in like the market saying, what are people just saying in like the sort of like the Twitter sphere, if you will. But also generally, I just keep an eye out to see like what are actual like features that like kind of catch my eye that I think is interesting. And for the most part, there's a lot of stuff that I just haven't tried just because I'm like, I don't know if this is actually going to be like truly applicable to like my work. So if I'm curious, then I'll go and try it. Otherwise, if I can see a way where this is actually going to be applicable to my day-to-day, then I'll actually spend some time and like kind of invest in like playing around with it. But it's really hard. It's like you're just inundated. Like the world is inundated with like product launches and like new features. And it's very, very hard to kind of keep on top of everything. So generally, I would say like if you see a bunch of people talking about it, like loops, for example, then it's like, okay, maybe I should look into loops.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of simple automations you've set up that have saved you a lot of time?
A lot of like the things that I set up. So I always try to think about building automations for like really like the pain points that are like very, very personal to me. And less so like, oh, here's like the super flashy thing that like maybe like a ton of people will use, or it'll get like a lot of views if I like share this on social. Like really the stuff that I try to always build is going to be like, man, this is such like a pain in the ass for me personally. So like some of the small things I built, like I'll give you one, like for example, like budget tracking. Budget tracking, if you're like a performance marketer or like you just manage like budgets in general, let's just say you're performance marketing, right? You have like all these different like ad platforms, and like maybe like let's say once a week you're going in and you're like, okay, I'm gonna export maybe spend from this last 7 days. I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna then copy and paste that over to like a Google sheet that I have. Oh, and then in my Google sheet I also have a sum formula, and then I'm also counting how many days have progressed, how many days are left in the month, and then I'll calculate my average sort of like run rate month to date, and then I'll take my total budget, subtract by that, yada yada yada, and then here's the number I need to paste to in order to hit my budget for the end of the month, right? Everyone does this. It's like it's cheap, and it doesn't take you a very long time to do. I, on the other hand, was like, well, I don't want to do this because yeah, I can do it very quickly, but it's still a waste of my time to do this. So one like very simple thing I built was within Cowork, there's a feature called live artifacts. Live artifacts, really all it is, it's just a sort of persistent HTML dashboard that Claude will code up. But the cool thing is you can actually integrate it with MCPs. So what I did was I just added in all the MCPs for the ad platforms that my team was managing. And then I would tell Claude, hey Claude, budget for this month for this channel is X, Y, and Z. Next month is this. I want you to basically now just pull in my spend, and I want to be able to visualize it. And I want you to show me how we're pacing, if we're pacing over and under, and whatever metrics I wanted to see. And with live dashboards, every single time you click into it, it'll just refresh. So it's basically just programmatically polling from the app platforms via MCP, and it's just like charting and graphing it for me. So you go from like, yeah, you're spending maybe 5 minutes a week doing this to like, now I can pop in at any time I want, and I can just see how are we pacing relative to this month's budget. I can also share the live artifact with anyone on my team, and then now they can see it as well. So like, that's like a very, very small one, but like that was like a huge thing for me, because I was like, I just don't want to spend my time doing like these very like mundane tasks of like, how much are we spending? Like how much do we have left to spend? And then if I want to adjust my budget, I just tell Claude like, hey, we're just updating the budget, regraph everything. So that's like a small one. Some of the other ones I built like very common. So it's almost like a chief of staff, but like more like a daily briefing. I was in a bunch of Slack channels. Particularly in marketing, you have a lot of external partners as well. So I would get, a couple hundred emails a week that I have to get through. And it's like very hard to juggle that and like your meetings and like Slack. So one of the things I also set up was very simple. I would just integrate, like it was like Google Drive, Google Calendar, Slack, my email, my ad platforms. And then every morning I wake up and there'd be kind of like a quick report of like, hey, here's like some of like the 3 things that are relevant to you that maybe happened on Slack yesterday. Here's like a bunch of emails that came in that you haven't gone through because I had a huge backlog. It's like, oh, by the way, I also marked all of like the like maybe transactional emails as read for you. If it's like, oh, here's like a billing email from like, one of the platforms, or like, here's like the 2FA login code for TikTok, all of these sort of like transactional emails that I didn't care about. Claude's like, oh, I marked them as read for you also. And like, here are like the 2 emails you actually do need to pay attention to. So that just sort of like helps center me. And these are all like not like very crazy workflows or automations, but they're like huge time savers for me. So like my sort of like these ethos has always been like, build the stuff that is like helpful for you personally. Don't worry too much about building stuff that's like, oh, like I want to build something that like 100 people at work can use, or like, all of Twitter will love. Just try to solve the pain points that are clearly impacting the way you work, and then just build something around it.
How do you think about when to automate versus when to just keep doing something manually?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the first things I think about is going to be like, what is like the volume or like frequency at which I like have to do something? So if we circle back to like the sort of budget thing that I just mentioned, it's like, yeah, probably doing it once a week. Okay, so in a year, you're doing it 52 times at least, right? Of like updating your budget tracking. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing this at a high enough like frequency where like, if I could automate this, like it would be great. I no longer have to do this 52 times in a single year or once a week. So that the frequency is going to be important. The other aspect I think is also going to be very important is like, when it comes to like automations and stuff, it's like, what is the actual like blast radius if something goes wrong? So typically I try to think about like, okay, I'll build something that hopefully is like a 2-way door, where it's like, if I want to reverse whatever was done, it's easily reversible. So like, what is that blast radius, and like, what is my sort of sensitivity? What's my threshold here for risk? Right? My risk tolerance of like, if something goes wrong with this, what does that look like? So if I'm building, let's say, an automation to, let's say, run my campaigns for me, like, let's say I built like a whole agent for it. If I think about like, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? It's like, okay, like maybe I accidentally add in like an extra 0 to the end of my daily budget. It's like, okay, that's not great. And it's like, but you can work around that. And it's like, okay, what else can happen? It could delete all my campaigns. Like, okay, that would be actually very problematic if it deleted all my campaigns. Or what if it uploads, unapproved copy? And that's like, oh, okay, like that's really bad also, because like the optics is not great, very public facing. So when I think about the blast radius, I think that's something that oftentimes people might like forget about. And then the third thing I think about is like, when I build like these workflows and automations, there's probably like two dimensions that I always think about. One is like, can this do it faster than I can? And if the answer is yes, then great. And the other dimension is like, can it do it better than I can? And like, that's something else I want to be true. And ideally, like both are true. So like triangulating across like those few sort of ingredients is kind of like my mental model of like, okay, like this probably does make sense for me to actually like go out and automate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are you most excited about for how AI can enable marketers to do great work in the future? Like when you imagine marketing in 2027 or beyond, like what do you think that looks like, and how does that like excite you?
I think AI will be able to help marketers basically free up a lot more of their time. Because you think about a lot of the work that happens today, a lot of it is like highly operational work. And there's a large amount of like overhead that goes into like anything related to marketing, right? If you're like coming out with like a new campaign, if you're like doing like a video shoot, there's a lot of like operational work that needs to go in before you actually even do the thing you wanted to do. So that means if AI can help streamline a lot of that operational, repetitive, high overhead work, that gives marketers more time to focus on their craft. So I think more and more important, especially as like the proliferation of AI becomes, even greater than it already is, right? It's like the attention to detail, attention to craft is going to matter a lot more, as well as like being able to like build like those more like human connections are going to be more and more important. Mm-hmm. So like what are ways we can have AI maybe handle a lot of the busy work so that marketers can actually focus on doing like their best work, which is like, how do we actually appeal to other humans? Mm-hmm. So like that aspect of like, whether it's like, how do we develop our brand even better? Or like, how do we actually do things in person like we're doing right now. Those aspects of marketing will become more important. So hopefully as marketers, we'll be able to free up our time to actually focus on that.
Yeah. A lot of the questions I got after my talk last night were about brand and how do you maintain that in the age of AI and taste and all of that. And it's funny that we were in a room with other humans and someone was asking me a question of how do you maintain brand, judgment and taste? And my answer was basically like, do more of this. There's more in-person work that I think we can all focus on. And for as much as we live on the internet and AI is so digital, I think that will just make the analog world and sitting in person with somebody else that much more interesting and helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Like one of the things I've noticed is like the sort of sub-function of marketing, like field marketing has, I feel like, seen like a reemergence. Like I feel like so many more companies now are like hiring, like so many AI companies are hiring for roles in community, field marketing. They're building like these like ambassador programs. And like the reason is because like it's nice when you get FaceTime with people. You get people together in a room. It's way easier than doing things like virtually. And as like AI becomes like more and more like kind of prevalent, like people actually start craving a lot more of like the human connection, which is why I think a lot of companies actually recognize this now.
Yeah, we have a head of community. She's actually listening to this right now. She's part of the podcast production process.
Oh, perfect. Hi.
She's amazing. Hey, Eleanor, good to see you. And yeah, we see a lot of this happen too. I mean, I see tech companies do little like cafes, like Cursor had a cafe in New York City, I think like last night.
Yep.
I saw on LinkedIn today, I know Anthropic has done a ton of this. I think it's like Lexi on the Anthropic team and kind of runs influencer.
Influencer, yeah.
I think she's
Cursor Cafe,
too.
shout out to Ben. We have EOI Emma at Notion, shout out to her as well. A lot of great folks building like these really strong communities, which is like nice. Like even though when you get everyone together talking about AI, it's like still like great. It's like better to do this in person than virtually.
Yeah. What do you think? Is there one role in marketing that you think, like I guess like maybe besides field marketing, that you think will kind of also have a resurgence going into next year?
Ooh. Very biased take, but I think growth marketing.
Yeah.
I think it's already kind of starting to happen. I mean, again, this is a very biased take as a growth marketer.
I love this, yeah.
But I think growth marketing in particular is like really positioned to like be some like the front runners within marketing to adopt AI, right? Like within marketing, there's so many different sub-disciplines. You have like product marketing, you got growth marketing, you have field marketing, there's community, list goes like on and on. There's a lot of different sub-functions. But you think about like growth marketing in particular, like growth marketers have always been one, like very close to the data, sort of like as defined by the job, right? You have to be like very, very data driven. And then so I think by virtue of that, especially like some of the growth marketers who maybe like for example, if you're like a lifecycle marketer, you're like building like almost like automations, like these automated flows within like your ESP. If you're a performance marketer, you're used to like, debugging your campaigns, diving into these very complex, like, ad managers, etc. So like they're technical in a sense, like they're a little bit more of a technical marketer. So I think that positions them really well to actually become very AI pilled. And like think about ways you can like, incorporate like AI more into their workflows. And especially like performance marketers, I will say like AI has been kind of a topic that's been like sort of circling in like their peripheral for like years, right? It's like all these app platforms, they've always been pushing like these AI machine learning features. Like, oh, you don't need to worry about like bidding. Google's AI will handle that for you. So like the concept of AI is not like very foreign to them. And so I think, again, all these factors put together sort of like positions them in like, I think a good way where they might start to think a lot more about like, okay, like I've been dealing with systems for years already. Now there's something here, AI's here, I can actually build my own systems. So I think a lot more growth marketers are going to be very curious. And I think that's why a lot of these sort of like marketing engineer roles that I've seen, like for example, Replit has a role right now where it's, I think the title is like product lead for growth marketing or something. And it's because they are clearly looking for these AI pilled growth marketers who have spent years like kind of like thinking about AI, kind of interacting with AI to now actually go out and do something about it. Because that sort of space around growth marketing is very prime for actually AI adoption.
Yeah, I mean that's my background too. So I very heavily agree with your bias here.
Yeah.
And I think growth marketers have been building systems forever.
Yeah.
It's been manual systems or things that they've kind of built themselves. And now with AI, like we truly all have superpowers basically.
Yeah.
If we can go and now have AI automate and build the system, everything's API based on the growth side too, like Meta, Google, LinkedIn.
Yes,
API,
that's another great. Yeah.
Which is huge. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. Austin, this was great. Thank you so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate it. Where can folks find and follow you online?
Well, thanks for having me. You can find me, I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me. I sometimes post on there and hopefully I'll post more.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That was Austin Lau, growth marketer at Anthropic. We'll put his LinkedIn in the video description below. If you're listening to this, all of these episodes are recorded on video on the Profound YouTube channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're on all the podcast apps too. If you want to learn more, go to tryprofound.com where you can get tons of free resources, including our guide on how to become a marketing engineer, our Profound University course where I teach a few lessons, and then you can download case studies, guides, white papers, and so much more. Thanks again for listening to this episode of The Marketing Engineer, and we'll see you next time. Keep building.